When we talk about things like racial divides, gender and sexuality, abortion, like there are real tangible ways that you can make a difference for someone who is somewhere in the spectrum of all those issues with loving kindness that points people towards God, because that's our ultimate hope for people, is that they would find a connection with God. Do you believe your participation in government is the end-all be-all to solving our cultural evils? Or do you believe that it starts with you and it starts with the daily interactions you have with the people around you?
I would vote my convictions. When it goes my way or it doesn't go my way, I'm still looking on a daily basis to live out those convictions, regardless of how politics went. What's up, guys? Welcome to the brand new CWC Now podcast. We're going to be talking about the hotly contested election today, and our perspective might actually surprise you, and we may even disagree a little bit. But first, we want to tell you what this CWC Now podcast is about. We want to help you respond to current events as people of God, and so whether you're a part of our in-person community or our online community, you can share this as you're having conversations with others, but we also want you to know, if you're just finding us online, you got a place here and it can help you guide this conversation together.
Yeah.
Yep, we're no experts by any means, but we're just having to do this. I'm Pastor Eddie. I'm the youth pastor here at Christ Wesleyan Church, and I've got with me Cameron. Cameron, tell us what you do here.
Yeah, I'm the creative director of film and storytelling here at Christ Wesleyan Church. So I love that title. It's such a fun title.
That is a super fun title. I want a new one.
What would you make your new title?
I don't know, but I've heard, you ever seen those people online when they talk about bad descriptions of what they do? It's like, we hold teenagers hostage in rooms.
I was about to say hostage negotiator.
It's like, we hold teenagers as hostage in rooms and teach them about texts that are thousands of years old or something, something like that. Yeah, hostage negotiator, that might be a good one. No, but we're going to get into some politics today, and I hope to have a civil conversation. I think Cameron and I come from slightly different perspectives on some things, just because we're different people. But we are united with something far greater than politics that are out there, and that is that we both love and serve Jesus.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so we've got a fun conversation for you today. We're going to kind of talk about voting, what our place has, politics as idolatry, where we find examples of that in Scripture, and just guide through the conversation a little bit. And so, Cameron, I got a question for you.
Sure, let's get into it.
All right. So I've got myself, who is a voting political party. I feel like I vote my convictions. And we're not going to get into details of what all those things are, but I have another friend of mine who is also, like, his conviction is to not vote. And so I want to, we've talked about this a little bit before this and dove into Scripture together and some of the examples there, but I kind of want to get into a conversation of whether we're voting members or non-voting members. What maybe does politics play in how we live out our faith? How do we respond to other people, and where the line is for political idolatry?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of funny that you, the pastor, is asking me that question when, like, that there's a lot that's involved in that question, right? Like, there's a lot of, I think, identity that people find in political engagement, and therefore it becomes very hard to, like, extricate themselves from their politics, maybe, or they think about these things within the same breath, right? Like, you start thinking about, like, descriptors of yourself that you can put down on a piece of paper, man, woman, my address, my whatever, my political affiliation, I'm a Republican, I'm a Democrat, like, these are really quick labels that become part of our identity. And so to really even consider what that all entails, what that might mean for you, and maybe this idea that your hold into politics might be an idol for you, might be even a part of, like, reconsidering a piece of your identity. And that's a hard thing to do no matter who you are, reconsidering your identity, I think.
Does your Facebook about me description match up with the context of the posts that you post about?
Well, I'm not on Facebook anymore, so, and I'm really not on a lot of social media anymore, just because I very quickly realize, I
It
was
can be toxic.
It can be toxic, and also like the novelty of it wore off for me, right? Like I was a senior in high school when Facebook was like a new thing, and I was just like, yeah, this is so cool. You can post pictures, you can like see what other people are up to, like you can show off this like little bit of your life, and then the novelty of it very quickly wore off. And the moment I began to realize that it was stealing some joy from me, I was like, no more. I'm done. I can't give any of this my energy. Like it was so easy just to sink down the rabbit hole of comparison based on what you were seeing on social media.
Right.
And then also, I know my stance on this is probably going to be different from yours, and this is not politics, but like I also had to consider the question, like in a lot of like the influencer world,
right?
You measure your value in likes, followers, subscriptions, all of that. It becomes very me-centric, the brand that I build. How many followers can I amass? What kind of reach do I have to the world around me? And I've felt a little bit of a holy discomfort with that idea because my life and the service that I give to other people, on this earth isn't about me. It's about God. And maybe I can use my platform to point there. I know that there's a lot of people who feel that way, but I've always felt a tension with that, like it isn't about me. And ultimately, at the end of the day, if it was me engaging in that area, it would be my name with a follower count beside it.
Right.
And that just always gave me a little bit of discomfort.
Yeah. We probably do have different sides of this because I run a social media account on the side as a second business.
Yeah.
But to hold that tension there, my name is actually not on it at all.
Oh, there you go. Yeah.
And on my social media account, it's interesting. Like I put, I think it's something like Christ follower, husband, father, youth pastor, astronaut. ... Okay, maybe not an astronaut.
I'm gonna say, how's that astronaut part working out for you?
But yeah, that's interesting because I do feel like I see people who maybe would identify as Christian, whose political commentary specifically is less about who Christ is and more about who's in office.
Yeah.
And I think scripturally, we see the flourishing of the people of God underneath administration that is the most anti-Christian.
Yeah.
And so that's an interesting concept to bring up, specifically whether you feel like you're on the winning or the losing side of whatever election comes up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so, yeah, let's get into some talks about this. So, first example that we have of kind of the people of God finding themselves in a government situation that did not glorify or honor God at all, we see in the book of Daniel as the Israelites are in exile. Mm-hmm. And so I know you were reading a book. It's called Exiles by Preston Sprinkle. Yeah. Preston Sprinkle's a great and very articulate author.
Yeah. Well-researched too.
Well-researched. Yep. Love his stuff. What was his perspective on that?
Yeah, it's really interesting because first off, I got to disclose that this book really shaped a lot of how I think about politics this year, and it came at just the right time for me just because there was so much, how exhausting it's been this year with all the political ads and all the conversations, and it can be exhausting.
Man, I almost moved to a different country from all this political ad. I got both sides. It was wherever I was.
How many robo-texts did you get in a day?
Oh, my goodness. And for some reason, dozens. And for some reason, they think that my name is Margaret.
Interesting.
So, like, literally, it'll be like, hey, Margaret, who are you voting? I'm like, I, first of all, am not Margaret.
Not Margaret. But yeah, so in his book, his kind of basic thesis is this idea of, like, so a lot of the way, like, the Israelites' story throughout the Old Testament functions is as a model for how the church should function today. And while the Israelites spent many, many, many years in exile under the control of oppressive regimes, he called them to maintain their identity as a people and maintain their worship of God as the one true God in the middle of these hostile environments. And in doing so, they had to find a way to practice their faith within a new culture. And it led them to this understanding that their true home wasn't the place that they were living. It wasn't Babylon. It wasn't Persia. It wasn't wherever their exile was at a given time. Their true home was the kingdom of Israel. And one day God was going to restore that. In the meantime, the call in their lives was to maintain that identity while not being absorbed into that culture in the wrong ways.
Yeah.
And Preston Sprinkle's argument in this whole book is that call can be the same for us today as the church, with the understanding that our true home is heaven. It's with God.
Yeah.
And we're facing a sort of exile from that now because life is hard and we've got earthly governments who rule in ways that maybe can be oppressive towards us or maybe don't align with our values, or maybe they are actually persecuting us. I mean, we actually do have instances of the persecuted church all around the world, but now we have this unique struggle in America where we've got a government that we can actually have a level of control in and have a level of participation in, compared to where the Israelites had to be submissive to a king or something like that. And therefore, what is the posture that the church should have? Preston Sprinkle's argument is one of submissive subversion, where you're subject to the empire, as it were, but your citizenship is in heaven.
Yeah.
And therefore that should change the way you think about the way, that the state interacts with you and where you're placing your energies and what you're hoping for God to do versus what you're hoping for the state to do and things like that.
Yeah.
It's really heaven-minded living at all times, including in political times where you might be tempted to think, man, if I don't vote a certain way, if I don't get a candidate in that I really want, life is going to be really hard, or the world's going to end. We literally have people saying that. I feel like every election that we have, no matter which side wins or loses, it's always
it will change everything.
Yes. And I think for Christians, the call is to believe that, no matter what that outcome is, God is supreme, God is sovereign, and how do we live for him and faithfully engage within our culture that brings honor to him apart from all of that?
Right. Yeah. And that kind of brings up the point of, a buddy of mine who felt convicted in this year, I feel like in casting my vote, I'm casting allegiance to one side or another. And so as a person whose allegiance belongs to Jesus, I don't feel like I can cast a vote in this fight, or not. I think, that's a valid place. I mean, if you can't in the same breath say vote your convictions, and if your convictions are not to vote, then demonize that person.
Yeah. But how it is so tempting to do that.
Right.
I think people who are left-leaning have a tendency to attack people who are right-leaning as being, some sort of vile, hateful bigot for holding different stances when they're not seeing the whole picture of what it is that it means to hold their side and not really reaching out with empathy.
Yep.
And in the same breath, people on the right side aren't seeing, ways in which people maybe on the left side have dealt with pain or trauma as a result of certain things that they've dealt with, and therefore can be judging, without empathy as well.
Yeah, and I feel like something the right misses for the left, and I remember having a conversation with someone on the left in college, and really trying to understand that perspective. Was their perspective came out of a place of genuine compassion for people, and so they really did want to help people the best. And I feel like that's where the middle ground is for both sides. If they could recognize that, I feel like both sides are trying to ultimately help people. They just have different methods of doing that. And so I think same thing when it comes to even in Christianity, different denominations or something like that. It's I think we're starting to come to this place, and I feel like we need to do this politically as well, of recognizing that we as people have far more in common than we do have what separates us.
Yeah.
And
I think, too, a conviction that I think I pulled from reading this book was, am I living out the way that the Holy Spirit would want me to interact with people, how he would want me to treat people, and that really can manifest in some really hot button issues. When we talk about things like racial divides, gender and sexuality, abortion, there are real tangible ways that you can make a difference for someone who is somewhere in the spectrum of all those issues, with faithfulness towards God and with compassion and mercy and loving kindness that points people towards God, because that's our ultimate hope for people, is that they would find a connection with God. At the same time, you can abhor the evil around there, but what are you doing to participate in ending that evil? Do you believe your vote and your participation in government is the end-all be-all to solving our cultural evils? Or do you believe that it starts with you, and it starts with the daily interactions you have with the people around you?
Yeah.
And, even Pastor Brandon a few weeks ago in his sermon had brought out this idea of, like, you can't change a culture unless you're willing to serve.
Right.
It starts there. And so I was just so thankful for that in Brandon's message, and then just hearing this again in this book, this idea of, like, okay, are you actually engaged in moving the needle culturally with the people around you?
Yeah. I think that's great. And I am thankful that I think we do in part see this in the people of God already. So like an anti-abortion issue, pushback from the left would be, well, who's going to take care of these people? These children, and the people of God, the church adopts at twice the rate that non-Christians do, which I think is phenomenal. But I think it's nothing in comparison to where God is calling us to be, to actually live out those things. And I think, on a similar note, like, I remember the first girl, and I don't want to talk about abortion a whole lot, but I remember the first girl that I met. I was 16 years old working at a coffee shop, and she came in late to work. And I was like, hey, like, where were you? Like, what happened? That kind of thing. She said, oh, I had to go get an abortion. And I remember almost passing out, because it was the first person that I'd met. And I was like, oh my goodness. And in that moment, I think in all of this, especially politically, it can be really easy to demonize. I think part of the right's argument is, like, let's say this horrible thing happened to this person and they chose to get an abortion. Abortion is another negative response on top of a negative thing that has already happened.
Right. Yeah.
But if our response to those people who have already made the bad decision is then to cast judgment and hatred toward them, we are also giving a negative response to a negative situation that's already happened.
Right.
And so, I feel like regardless of what side of the aisle we fall on, and I know some great people on both sides that claim to be followers of God, we need to err towards grace and living out these principles. Because if we don't, I think that's where we get into that idolatry, right? We're serving a political party more than we are acting out God's will.
Yeah.
What he's calling us to.
Which I think it's a really great segue back to Daniel for a second here, because the story of Daniel is a story of living under a government that doesn't stand for God.
Right.
If in fact it's openly hostile. And yet Daniel, throughout that book, has pretty interesting connections to the state. I mean, he's literally having FaceTime with the king.
Yeah.
There's a lot to be said about the politics of that. I just, as a pastor, kind of take us through that a little bit, like where you see political identity and what God might be saying about that through the book of Daniel.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's an interesting issue because we don't find ourselves fully in the situation that the people of Israel did during their time of exile, because they were in a situation that was out of their control. And we do see the people of Israel at different points in time, as they're under the rule of other people, step into it and form and shape. I think of even Joseph as he comes in and he becomes the second in command of all of Egypt, right? Like, there are things at play where he's following the call of God on his life to step into certain roles and places that shape different things, like helping people be able to have grain that's stored up so that he can serve out these different people. Or Esther, in the book of Esther, you mentioned that in the Exiles book from Preston Sprinkle as well, who does a great job balancing both sides. Where she puts herself into a position of leadership, thinking, maybe I'm here for just such a time as this.
Yeah.
Where she is using the leverage that she has to help shape part of the policy that Haman tried to pull in to influence the king under. She, basically used her position there to change that policy back toward protecting the lives of Jews.
So the line is never as simple as, like, engaging in politics wrong, not engaging in politics right.
Right.
God can use your
Both.
engagement. Yeah.
And sometimes, we may engage in the people of God, find ourselves exiled in Babylon, whatever that means to you. That doesn't mean that God's no longer at work. And oftentimes God works more effectively during times of persecution or when things we perceive to be going the wrong way.
Yeah. What I find so interesting too about like the Daniel story is like, had Daniel taken a posture of like offensiveness towards his oppressors, he would not have had the access to influence. And I think that's something that we have to consider too, is sometimes I think we look at the evil around us in our world, in our country, and our impulse might be to pull away or to look with kind of like you were saying, judgment or something like that. And maybe our intentions are good with that, but the cost for that might just be our ability to speak into the culture.
Right.
And I think that's one of the things I kind of take away from reading Daniel as a book is like, Daniel didn't condone the culture by his participation in it.
Right.
His participation in it was vital for his ability to influence people towards God. But there was a hard line drawn when that crossed over into idolatry. And we see that several times across the book of Daniel. That was the real issue, was the government was inserting itself as God. The king was inserting himself as God. And I think that can be a tricky thing to kind of think about even today in our modern culture. We don't have a king. We don't have someone who's using theological arguments necessarily to prop up their position of power. But are there ways in which we have to examine ourselves, and are we placing political capital or political power in that same place? Do we think our participation in politics would change things the way that a king could change things, and therefore we're showing politics or our participation in it to be our God rather than God?
Right. Yeah. And I think for myself, I think that voting has a place, but it can very easily turn into, okay, well, I voted this way, it went my way, now I don't have to do anything. And I don't think that's true at all.
Yeah.
Like I think myself, I would vote my convictions, but when it goes my way or it doesn't go my way, I'm still looking on a daily basis to live out those convictions regardless of how politics went. Mm-hmm. So I still make my voice heard, try to put myself in positions of leadership, power, those kind of things, but I'm not overthrowing the government because I'm super upset that it didn't go my way.
Yeah.
And now the whole country's lost and, God is dead.
Yeah. And I think that's so important too, because I do think some people in the church utilize their political expression as a way to hand wave away any personal responsibility to be a part of culture shift or steering people towards Jesus.
Totally agree. One thing that I did want to mention inside of here is what political idolatry might look at, because I've seen things on both sides where it breaks my heart that people are allowing politics to break up their families.
Yeah.
Where fathers are coming against kids and kids are going against their moms and their dads. And so I think a really easy litmus test for this is if you're allowing your political leanings to break apart what your family structure is, that's a really easy indication of political idolatry. Literally part of what held the identity together of the people of Israel while they were in captivity in different places and eras of history is their call to love the Lord God with all their heart, soul, mind, and strength, to raise their kids up in the ways of God. The Shema, Deuteronomy 6, right? That's something that they were doing every single day. Part of what the struggle is that we face as the people of God in 2024 and soon to be 2025 is that we're busy. And we have allowed educational institutions, media, all these kind of things to have larger voices in our families' lives than I think that God has called us to. And so, whereas I do think that we can place our vote in such a way to limit the amount of anti-Christian rhetoric that's out there, or anti-Christian value rhetoric that's out there, your kids are not lost just because that is the way. I mean, you think about them being raised in these pagan cultures where these other gods were worshipped. Like, that is a much more intentional effort to convert and to brainwash kids than even
literally
what we're seeing right now. Yeah.
To worship other gods.
Right, to worship other gods. And not even like a tricky, like the god of money or something like that.
Yeah.
No, like a giant statue of a different person.
Yeah. Yep. You're a youth pastor, so like, as far as I'm concerned, you're on the front lines of this. Like, what's, for lack of a better term, what does that battle look like from the front lines? And I guess also, like, how much do you see yourself interacting with parents and talking with them about, like, what's it like to engage with their kids in a responsible way this way too? Yeah,
I would say the tension that I feel right now is in conversation with parents, how to communicate how important it is to invest in your kid while making them feel like I'm not shaming them, right? Because I'm not trying to shame them, but I do think that every single parent, myself included, has to do a better job of being intentional. The intentionality with our kids is the single most important thing. And I got a text from a parent last night saying, "Hey, we haven't met before, but my son is really struggling with something, and there's lots of depression, anxiety, like those kind of things that are happening inside of there. What are some of the things?" And I can tell parents that guys, for instance, of our high school guys that come through, 99.9% of them look at pornography. Period. It is a struggle. Period. Every single parent that I talk to is pretty much like, well, yeah, that's true for most kids, not my kid.
You're not the 0.1 or whatever it is.
You are not the 0.1, right? And it's like, there are incredible tools that God has given to us. I think about like social media. I think about iPhones, or Androids or whatever device you happen to be on. Those are incredible tools. They're also incredibly dangerous tools. Mm-hmm. And starting from a young age, I do think that there's a benefit to sheltering them as much as possible because we are in an information overload era. So there are millions of voices that are out to reach the minds, the thoughts, the buying decisions, everything of our kids. And so we need to be so intentional about what we're pouring into them on a regular basis. We need to be so intentional about what we're modeling on a regular basis. If church isn't a priority for the parents, it's not going to be a priority for the kids, right? There's a Harvard study that recently came out that showed a weekly attendance, not when it's not football season attendance, not when it's when it's convenient attendance. A weekly attendance was the only thing that led to, I think it was 66% less for girls to have a death by despair is what the Harvard study called it. This is not a Christian study.
Yeah.
But this is suicide, drug addiction.
Got it. Okay.
Those kind of things. I would have to look up all the studies off the top of my head, but it was like, there were crazy results, and they were not talking about, they actually differentiated people who were religious but non-practicing versus those who considered themselves religious and attended.
Got it. Okay, that's interesting.
Weekly, at least one service per week. Yeah. So these are invested people. Right now, the church considers an average attender at least once per month. A lot of churches are using 10 times per year. Whoa. That's less than once per month. This is talking about weekly people. We're battling, even the Surgeon General of the United States declared a national emergency on anxiety and depression, not just for our teenagers, but also the loneliness of parents.
Okay.
Both of those things have huge rising demographics. And what this Harvard study pointed out was that by all causes of death, it lowered all causes of death just attending church once per week by 33%.
Whoa. Whoa.
All forms of mortality.
Which probably speaks to the ways in which God designed us for community, and we just need each other.
Absolutely, yeah. Community, sharpening each other, holding each other accountable, living out your faith in Christ, not just on a Sunday morning from 9 a.m. to 1 p.m. or whatever it is, but Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, right?
Yeah.
All throughout the rest of the week. And it kind of harkens back to what's on our Facebook bio versus what's the context of our posts. It's the same thing of like God isn't going to just look at that Sunday morning and be like, yeah, that's good.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Like it is what is the context of our life about every single one of us worships something.
Yeah.
Right? If we were to get all of our life and pull it out on a manuscript or a transcript of our life and sent it over into ChatGPT and said, give me a summary, right?
Yeah.
Like, what are the things that our life itself would show that we are valuing and lifting up?
Yeah.
And so in this season right now, if that's all just political rhetoric more than it is pointing people towards Christ, I think that we have trouble.
Yeah, man, thank you so much for bringing that up, because I feel like, idolatry can be a very hard thing to define for us today, because we read stories of it in the Bible and it's very clear what it is, like you were talking about with the statues and bowing down to them. Like that's the definition of idolatry in the Bible. But I mean, the true definition of idolatry is like placing our hope and our hearts in something that isn't God, that isn't. And in doing so, showing almost like an act of reverence or worship to that thing over God. And I think, kind of like you were saying, there's lots of things in our lives that we can begin to show that with, and it's kind of interesting. You were talking about like people having shown their political idolatry when like they're getting in fights within their own families and things like that, and they are. Like that kind of stuff should not be happening, especially if like the families are, professing Christian belief, Christian values, like you shouldn't be holding your politics so tightly that it's driving a wedge between you and other believers.
Absolutely.
And especially within your own family. And I had a friend who was talking to me and just kind of had this really awful interaction with her dad over some of this political stuff, and like just her dad calling her things that I just was like shocked. I was like, no parent should ever call their child like this. And I felt really bad for her, but my immediate challenge to her is like, well, it's very clear that like he's holding his politics as an idol if he's willing to treat you like that over his politics.
Yeah.
But on the same side, my encouragement to her was like, are you so hurt by this because you're holding your own politics tightly too?
Man.
And like, that I didn't say that without any like, I was definitely being sympathetic to her, definitely showing her kindness and mercy that she needed in that moment. But I was just like, I think we always have to examine that. And there's no reason to not look at our own motivations and look at our, what is holding our heart. Even if you think that you don't have an excuse, if you're hurting, if you're, if you feel wronged, if you feel like you're on the losing side, I think you still got to examine your own heart, and understand why it is you feel that way and why, maybe you are guilty of that too. Political idolatry right now doesn't necessarily look like the person who's won, their candidate has won and they're gloating about it. It could very much look like that, but it could also look like the person who is so deeply disturbed and has so little hope right now because their candidate lost.
Yeah, and you mentioned something and it triggered something in my mind that if you, of you being wronged, and it's the Matthew 18 model of reconciliation, which puts the onus on making wrongs right on the one who's wronged.
Yeah.
Right?
Isn't that wild?
It's so wild. Just to give you guys a reference, it says, this is the, I don't know why it pulled up the Phillips New Testament, but I'm sure it'll be all right. It's on BibleGateway.com.
Thank you, Google.
But if it says, this is Matthew 18, 15 through 17, but if your brother wrongs you, go and have it out with him at once. I like the Phillips version. This is interesting.
Yeah.
Just between the two of you. If he'll listen to you, then you've won him back as your brother. But if he won't listen to you, then take one or two others with you, so that everything that is said may have the support of 2 or 3 witnesses. If he still won't pay attention, tell the matter to the church. And if he won't even listen to the church, he must be to you just like a pagan or a tax collector. That's a hard verse, and is also really interesting that the onus goes on the hurt person, but if you love that person and you're willing to that love should outweigh your political views to go and reconcile with them.
Yeah.
And so, I think even in the church, even outside of political issues, I think idolatry plays in a lot of different places where some of the hurts and pains, some of the deepest hurts and pains that I have in student ministry comes between fathers and their children.
Yeah.
For some reason, and I think statistics would prove this, I think a mother's role is incredibly valuable.
Yeah.
I think it is a very, very important thing. For some reason, some of the deepest wounds that we have for men and for women come from their fathers. There's something about the father's voice that can build you up or absolutely wreck you. There's a little bit of that in the human nature of remembering negative things. I think it's like 7 times more, 7 times longer. Like it'll take 7 positive things to outweigh 1 negative thing that's said
that
about
makes sense. Yeah.
I think for the father, it's probably a lot greater.
Oh, yeah. I could see that. Yeah. And I think this is kind of a timely message in some ways because we're going into the holidays here. And I know it's kind of a meme for a lot of people. Like you're going home, you're going with the family you haven't talked with in a while, and like you're inevitably going to come across politics as a sort of break point when you're forced to be with these people again.
Yeah.
And I think that can have some really specific challenges for us. Like if you are a parent and you're bringing in children who disagree with you politically,
absolutely.
Are you going to feel tempted to interpret their political differing from you as a respect issue?
Right.
I think it's
that's huge.
worth reiterating there that like just because they think differently with you about how something should happen in our government doesn't mean that they're not respecting you.
Yep.
And so the call in that way shouldn't be to provoke. I think before we had sat down for this, we had talked about Ephesians 6.
Yeah.
And we have that's kind of like the rules and ordinances for how families should work. And in there you have fathers not exasperating their children.
That's right.
Parents, don't exasperate your children. So like don't try and gloat. Don't try and poke the bear. Don't try and start something over politics, maybe.
Right. Your relationship with your children matters more than even being right inside of individual circumstances.
Yeah.
And so don't ruin the whole war to win a battle.
Right.
And so you're not going to win their ear or their heart by ostracizing them.
Yeah.
Period. We have in my family, I have siblings that voted differently than I do. I have a cousin who lives an alternative lifestyle. I have grandparents that are not Christian. Like there's a whole lot that are all coming around the same table. And I think there's always a temptation for everyone, regardless of belief, to try to bring that stuff up and cause, there's a lot of division that's out there.
Yeah.
And it's not that you can't have conversation. I think we need to be able to. I think as a culture we need to claim the ability to agree in a healthy and respectful way again. But it may not be around the dinner table at Thanksgiving.
Yeah.
It's okay to enter into some of those topics, but as soon as you start to feel like maybe the relationship is being damaged, like you go, hey, I love you more than this conversation. Like if this is going to come between us, let's move on to something else.
Right. And it may be a sign, that might be one of those litmus test moments you're talking about. Like if you're feeling yourself like hyped up, keyed up over any of that, maybe you have to evaluate the hold that it has over you too there.
Yeah.
So
in student ministry, we talk about this a lot in terms of relational equity. So a bank account per se. And so there are times when I have to say really hard things to students, right? Like really difficult truths in their lives to expose a faulty way of thinking or sin that is inside of their life. But it does not come, or I do not do it, without first building a solid foundation of relational equity, meaning that they know beyond the shadow of a doubt that I love them. That even if we come to a point of disagreeing or something like that, they know that what I'm talking to them about is in their best interest. And I think that happens over a long period of time of showing love in big ways, in small ways, of showing up in the in-between. So where we see this not play out very well is in Thanksgiving or something like that, when
Yeah.
you barely rub shoulders with people throughout the year, and then all of a sudden you're going to grandstand,
Yep.
around the dinner table, and everybody's fighting, and it's like, oh, I hate coming home.
Yep.
And people are going to remember for a lot longer how you make them feel over what you say.
Yeah.
And so even just the tension that someone can feel walking into a situation around their family can shadow anything else, any truth that you try to speak to them. And so that the relationship there is so, so, so important.
Yeah. We laid in a little bit to the parents there, but I kind of want to flip it just real quick too for the kids, like honoring your father and mother who may disagree from you politically too in that situation. I'm drawn back to what Preston Sprinkle said in Exiles about this idea of submissive subversion.
Wow, man, that does play into that.
Yeah, I think you can practice that if you're in that situation as like someone who's going home and is around parents who don't believe like you do and are on some other side of the political aisle from you and you're finding it hard. If you are willing to serve someone the way that Christ served us, I think it's way harder for them to dehumanize you, if that makes sense. And therefore, that's where the subversion part comes in there. Like you're sort of subverting the way that they might have a barrier up by serving them. And so you might be in a situation where you don't really feel like your family deserves your kindness or mercy or whatever, just because of whatever happened in the election and whatnot. Yeah. But do it anyway.
Yep. Yeah. All throughout Scripture, God calls us to treat others the way that He has treated us.
Yeah.
And thanks be to God that while we were still enemies, He died for us.
Yeah.
Right? Like that Scripture speaks very clearly, as Jesus taught us to pray, Our Father who's in heaven, hallowed be your name, your kingdom come, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us of our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us, and lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. And then Jesus kind of circles back and is like, don't think that I missed this. If you don't forgive your brother, your Father in heaven will not forgive you. And that's like a hard truth there of saying like God only expects of us what He has already done for us. And so in the same way, we need to be able to overlook some of these things to show love, right?
We've talked a lot about how it's important to really engage with the people around us, regardless of the politics, like letting go of that idol of politics and truly living out service to one another, both in the church and in our community and all of that, regardless of our politics, and how that God can use that to change the culture. And we're kind of in the middle of a big shift as a church, locally trying to do that. For those who don't know, we're in a major capital campaign right now called Reach the One, that is kind of all about that as a church. Eddie, do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, Reach the One. It's something that God's been putting on our heart for years now as we've been praying and planning and preparing. But and I think there's a tension here inside of the community, not inside of our local community, but in the church community as a whole, because something that's out there is that they feel like the church is always all about money, right? Which is tough because we require money in order for things to function and lights to be on and
for podcasts to be recorded.
Podcasts to be recorded. And then there's also things that people don't think about, such as like, let's say you're like, well, let's build a new building. Well, that's really expensive. Why don't you just buy an old building? And so then we buy an old building, but what a lot of people don't realize is when you buy an old building and then repurpose it, you have to meet all the code that comes from repurposing a building. So everything that wasn't in code before, you have to pay to fix up. And so whether you're building a new building or you're renovating an old building,
costs money.
It costs so much money. And what's really interesting is if we can get past that part of the conversation or that hurdle, that obstacle, these kind of campaigns where there's a focus on reaching out, on opening up an avenue to serve more people, the church grows. Statistically, throughout our own church history, but also in churches around the globe, when there's this call to go, hey, we're going to invest at a higher level, the church starts to expand. People start to come because there's vision, there's investment. There's something about when you are financially invested, when you're investing with your gifts, your talents, your abilities, all those kind of things. You're like, hey, let's do this together. There's ownership that's involved. There's even a church that's local to us that they say that they constantly have a capital campaign.
Interesting.
So as soon as they finish one, they start another. Not to say like, oh, we just need more and more money, but it's like, hey, God is continuing to call us deeper and wider, and he's doing more things in different communities that don't have a lot of resources in those areas. So they just keep new things out in front of the congregation. And so with the Reach campaign for us, we are looking to eliminate debt at our main campus and then build renovate a campus down in our Sunbury location. And so it'll take us from I think the max room size is like 125 or somewhere around there for our Sunbury campus. And this new campus should put us somewhere like 400 to 500. I don't know if they have exact details.
I don't know yet, but yeah.
But yeah, 3-4 times the size, great space for teen ministry, children's ministry. And right now for both of those, they're meeting in the basement. And it is like no room left at all. And I'm 6'4", and so there are
you gotta be scraping the ceiling.
There's areas where I'm like, my head's getting shaved. There's areas where I got to duck beneath doorways because they're like lower than me. But it's going to be an area where, especially in the Sunbury community, we're going to be able to have a greater impact in that area. And then just from a financial side, we don't like to pay interest to banks. It's not a favorable thing. Like that is literally money that can be used to expand the gospel, to reach new people, to bring in more employees, like all that kind of stuff there. And so we want to be able to steward the money that's entrusted to us in the best possible way that we can. And so we're just looking forward to the next chapter that God has for us. And I'm excited.
Yeah. What I find great about like the campaign too, is it's really devoted to paying for things that are making a very conscious impact in our community. Right. They're reaching out to our community. So like, you talked about the debt that we have. The majority of that debt came from our decision to construct an addition to our building called Phase 1 years ago. And the concept behind Phase 1 was we're going to just build this as a service to our community. So it's got a gym, coffee shop, indoor playland, and a youth area and a bookstore. And these are all things that are services to our community in many ways. We've got,
sure.
I know that there are people who come into that coffee shop like throughout the week, throughout the day, just to come here because it's a great spot to work and get some work done. And there are people who would probably not come into a church otherwise who have come in as a result of our decision to build that out there.
Yeah, absolutely. And like, I think about our coffee shop and the playland that's inside of there, which is phenomenal. My wife, before she picked up her second job, would spend a large portion of every day in there. And I called her our Playhouse missionary because she would literally get into conversations with people all the time about the gospel. And it was just people like, hey, where are you at? What do you think about these different types of things? And she was able to rub shoulders with a woman who is in a physically abusive relationship. And this woman opened up and was crying. And she was able to talk to her and build this relationship with her, pray for her, help her to find a way out of that relationship. And now my wife still continues to see her and she checks in on her. She builds relationships with people that then started to come to the church. And it's like, whoa, hey, I see you here inside of this place. And that's just part of the way my wife's heart is. But it was that opportunity presented itself because of what God's equipped us to do here in this place. I was out at a local fair recently. Our youth department set up a book there, and I met a young woman who came through our school and that we have here on campus.
Christian
and
school,
she was in the Christian school, but not a Christian. And through the Christian school, gave her life to Christ. And then, grew up in a family that was not Christian, and they ended up coming to Christ. And it was like just this trickle effect that you could see all throughout her life. It determined where she went to college, how she lived out that faith while she was in school, what she's doing now. Pastor Brandon's marrying her. He's performing the ceremony.
Yes.
Maybe that's already happened because it's been a little while now. But I was also able to meet someone else who came to the church the first time through our coffee shop.
That's so cool. Yeah.
I think about our youth space. I mean, we use it for roughly 140 students that attend regularly with us on a bi-weekly basis, twice a week basis. But then even in this last week, I think we've had a funeral inside of there for someone inside of our community. We had a school event. So like not the school that our church is, but like our district CSIU that was actually able to meet inside of our building. We had a local business HR seminar that was inside of there. Then we had a Spanish ministry concert. And then we had, I think, our young adult. No, it was a live streaming board game event.
Yeah,
that was happening. So it's just like every single day, and that creates some work from us as staff members inside of there, resetting and making sure everything's reset. But man, how cool is it that room is used? I mean, the students that come in on Wednesdays and Sunday mornings have no idea throughout the week that it's used in all of these different spaces, you know, where people's first time coming into our church is us providing that cost at a fraction or for free of what they would be able to find elsewhere.
Yeah. And I think, like, if you're not familiar with our church, you might like kind of think like, man, they got a coffee shop and a gym and all that stuff there. Like, what are they doing? But like, we're in rural Pennsylvania. Yeah. Like, a lot of those services don't really exist around us in a real tangible way, and it is a service to our community in that way. And kind of like what you were saying, there's almost something always happening there as a result of just having the space open to the community. And as a result, there's people coming into the church who probably would never set foot into a church normally. Yeah. And that's an opportunity for influence. And that's why we did it. Right. And, it's a way to show love to our community, but it's also a way to influence them towards Christ with this facility.
Yeah, absolutely. It's modeling that same love. The people that we have coming inside of this church building throughout the week are not people who have surrendered their life to Christ. Some are. Mm-hmm. Right. But there's a lot there where we go, hey, we want to take the first step and we want to show you love and kindness. I know in the coffee shop, there are times when people are broken down and one of the baristas will offer them a free drink, or they come in, happen to be there on a Sunday, and they'll leave their spot behind the counter and go take them up to the hub and go, hey, here's a great place to connect or introduce them to a pastor or whatever it is. Like we're just all the time, how we've been able to reach the one through what God has entrusted us with so far has been phenomenal.
Yeah. And then, of course, the other side of the campaign is what we've been doing in Sunbury. Yeah. And there's a little bit of history there, too, as well, that's so cool. Like, we took on the Sunbury campus, I think, in 2018, and that was a huge undertaking to, make it, kind of bring it into one of our locations. And at the time, the current Sunbury campus was just another Wesleyan church in the area that was struggling, and we were asked to kind of take it under our wing and make it
would have died had we not.
Yeah. And so I remember being in there for some of like the original Sundays when we had relaunched that campus into a campus of ours, and I was just like, okay, like this is such a different feel than our thing, and I have no idea where it's going. And then you kind of see the trajectory of where this ended up being today, with our recovery church now that's run out of there and our recovery ministries that are run out of there. So we're reaching out to the city of Sunbury, where addiction is a huge issue. Right. It's a big social problem that we're deciding to take on, to the point where we're going to offer compassion to people who are struggling with addiction and hope, the hope of Christ to them. And I remember being in there the first Sunday we launched Recovery Church on a Friday night, and there was like maybe I think 30 to 40 people there, which I was already like impressed with, because I was just like, well, the fact that anybody felt safe, who's in that space just to come into a church on a Friday night to be here was like spectacular. Right. Nowadays, like, it's wall-to-wall bodies. Right. It's like you can't breathe in there. There's that many people, which is, praise God that we're there at that place, that we're reaching out to that many people. But the biggest limiting factor on that ministry being able to continue and to grow is the space. Absolutely. There are literally people who are pulling in on a Friday night or a Sunday morning and not able to park, or they walk in and they see just how packed it is in there and they walk right back out. Yep. So the physical need for space is so evident there, and that's, God has like already worked like a miracle as far as I'm concerned in that we found this new location.
Yeah.
It was offered to us and we were able to acquire it, and that we're going to be able to turn it into like a home with space to grow for this ministry.
Yeah. And for people that don't know, the building that we are in the process of purchasing is a old car dealership. And so if you think about a car dealership, a lot of times when you're looking at the main floor, the ground level, it has the large windows that you can look into. It's on the main strip of coming down into like downtown Sunbury. And just the idea that people would be able to look inside and see the happenings of the church as they're going down, like people who are lost, who are struggling with addiction, who are hopeless, who are, all those kind of things, like having no barrier to be able to see what's going on. Like my mind instantly goes to like, hey, once this is all put together, they have like a little coffee shop bar or whatever it is down there. A coffee bar, not a bar.
Yeah. Yep.
We're in the recovery business.
I was gonna say, it's a recovery church.
So yeah, our recovery church will be there. Our Sunbury main campus will be there. And so, but just I imagine the people that are so filled with hope and light and freedom that is found in Christ, and people driving down the street and seeing their faces as they're interacting with each other, just being hope and light.
And what I really love about that too, like if you've been there on a Friday night or if you've been there on a Sunday, like it's so evident the Holy Spirit is at work there. Yeah. But I also love how much those people are living out what it means to be the church. Like they're in each other's lives, they're invested, they're helping each other grow, they're doing the one another's, they're sharing meals together, they're taking care of each other. Like it's beautiful to see. And I think a thing to think about too with this campaign that we're going through is like, it might be really easy to make a commitment or write a check or whatever and think that that's it. But I'm really hoping that this campaign is also a reminder for people to take that next step spiritually to engage, to give of their time in service to one another. Yeah. Just like that recovery community is doing with each other. Like maybe if you're in our church and you've kind of been maybe more of like a fence sitter for a while and you've seen this campaign, like I'm hoping that you might make that decision, like maybe I need to find an area that is like my area of ministry and I want to get involved. Maybe it's with youth and Eddie and everything that he's doing there.
It is, I'm going to just say it is with youth already.
And I just think that's important too, is like, it's not just about money and what we can give. Right. God asks for our whole heart. Yep. And so are we going to give of ourselves to our service, our time? This is a new chapter of ministry for us. Yeah. And it might be that time for you to make that decision, to engage in that way.
Maybe God has prepared you for such a time as this.
There you go.
We're
kind of bringing it all around
back to Esther.
Well, yeah, that was our first episode of CWC Now.
Awesome.
Yeah. So we're going to be doing these pretty much once a month like this, and hoping that we can continue to kind of stay relevant and stay up to date with whatever's going on in our world and be responding. And we're going to do our best to do that faithfully, coming from this perspective that we might not necessarily agree on all things, but
that's right.
We're going to try and live that out faithfully and God-centeredly.
Yeah, and we want you guys to be able to share these conversations with people that you're having conversations with outside of the church. And so as you're entering into those, maybe a hot topic comes up and you're like, hey, actually, some people from my church, a pastor, the creative arts director, the creative storytelling. I have this written down.
Creative director of film and storytelling.
That's
it.
It is. What does that acronym spell? Is that anything? That's it. We should really work on that.
Yeah. Not really.
Kadofs. We want you to be able to share that as just people are, a lot of times not knowing how the church actually thinks and processes about things. We want to help you do that and to help others do that. And so we have a special guest coming. I don't know are we allowed to announce that?
I don't know. Are we allowed to announce that?
I don't know. But we do have a special guest coming in December. If you are into the YouTube world, it will be a name that you recognize, especially if you're in the Christian community and are trending on pop culture and things like that. And so I'm excited to have him. I'll be in Thailand, and so I won't be a part of that, which is sad because he's had an incredible influence on my life. And so if you are just tuning in, make sure you hit the like and subscribe on whatever platform you're finding this on, because you do not want to miss the next podcast.
Yeah, and maybe you've got a comment you want to throw down there too, just in response to anything we talked about today. We'd love to hear from you guys, what you have to say, your thoughts and opinions about this, and also your thoughts for maybe future podcast subjects. If you've got a topic that you'd like us to address, go ahead and put that in the comments too. We'd love to. I mean, we're going to do our best to stay up to date with what's going on in our world, but there's plenty of things we can talk about. That's for sure.
Yeah, we have a running list, and it was very quick. Even in the month leading up to this, we're like, wow, that's old news now.
Yep. Man, the news cycle moves fast. And then the other thing too is if you're an attender at Christ Wesleyan, we're tying this into our CWC Now magazine, which is a quarterly publication that comes out where you can kind of learn about what's going on at our church in a quarterly basis. And so if that is something that is of interest to you and you want to kind of stay up to date with what's going on, we highly recommend you find the CWC Now magazine that's at our locations, or you can find the digital copy of that at our website, cwc.life/CWC Now. That's just a place there you can check out what our most recent edition of that is, and it's we're actually kind of due for a new edition here. December is kind of where the new one will come out.
You'll find out what's going all the way down to the end of April.
Yeah, which is with a church like ours where there's just something always going on. It's a lot.
That's right. But
you also will have some stories in there too, from our pastors and stories of what God's doing in ministry here. It's kind of funny for our first edition of that. I believe, was it you who wrote a feature in there? I think you did.
Yes.
For CWC Now, yeah.
Yeah, because it had someone else from Recovery Church's photo.
And someone else from Recovery was there, yeah.
My name was over their body, so yeah.
Anyway, so you'll be able to see some sort of encouragement or article from.
I think Pastor Chris is writing this one.
Pastor Chris, okay, there we go. Yeah, our children's pastor will be writing that. So I'm curious to see what he'll be writing about.
There's a coloring section.
There you go.
I'm just kidding. No, there's not.
Color by numbers. So yeah, check all that out, and make sure just to follow along with what's coming out on a monthly basis there too, from us and from CWC Now, and really our church. And our encouragement to you guys too, if you are listening and you're a part of our online community, maybe you attend our online church, is to make a connection. Decide to kind of tune in on a Sunday morning, or if you're in the area, maybe attend in person at either Milton or Sunbury, and you can find more about our services and all of that on our website as well.
Hey, thanks for joining us on our first episode of the CWC Now podcast. Make sure you like, subscribe, comment those future episodes, and we'll catch you next month.
See you later.